If more than 28 Conservative MPs are prepared to vote down Rishi Sunak's flagship legislation on stopping the boats, then we could be into a real political crisis. And among those egging this on are a gallery of the most prominent right-wing figures in the party, including Suella Braverman, Robert Jenrick, Lee Anderson, Lord Frost, and of course from outside the Commons these days, Boris Johnson. You heard Sir John Hayes on this show yesterday saying he'd find it hard to vote against this bill as it is. But so far, I'm not sure the rebels really have the numbers tomorrow night. We've had two resignations. I'm joined now by Natasha Clark, LBC's political editor. We've had two resignations, Natasha, tonight. Neither of them at all surprising.
No, I don't think so. I think the government made very clear to those two that if they did decide to vote with the rebels tonight, then they would have to be sacked or resign their roles, which they have. Brendan Clarke-Smith and Lee Anderson, both of the Conservative Party, have signed a joint resignation letter this evening. They've said that they were elected in their red wall areas on this very important issue of sovereignty, and it was important to bring those migration numbers down. They said they felt Britain was being bound by a framework which was out of date and reminded Rishi Sunak of his promise to stop the boats.
Now, they're very different MPs, these two, of course, Natasha, and I've been reading their joint resignation letter, and it seems to me there is a broad hint that they might actually vote for this bill, though they don't like it at third reading. They say they're voting this way not because we're against the legislation, because, like everybody else, we want it to work. The task is not an easy one, and we appreciate the fine balance that must be struck. These do not seem to me like ultras who are going to try and bring down Rishi Sunak tomorrow.
They definitely don't want to, but they also do say in this letter that in the past we've signed amendments, we've voted for these rules, we've on various occasions spoken in the media and argued that these safeguards need to be put in place. They said it's important in terms of our credibility that we are consistent with our voters. So I think it's all up in the air to play for. And what we do know in terms of those numbers so far is that around 10 Tory MPs have already said that they are prepared tomorrow at third reading to vote this whole thing down. And if we only need 28 to 30 MPs, we're already a third of the way there. I would never, want to rule that out. As, just 24 hours away from the actual vote, and we've already got 10 MPs saying they could vote the whole thing down.
So the crucial question really is how many of the 68 who voted for these amendments tonight will vote against the bill on third reading? If the answer is around half, then Rishi Sunak is in dead trouble, isn't he?
I think so, and I think, the rebels tonight will be pleased with their show of support. It was slightly more than I think anybody had expected.
Certainly more than I'd expected,
yes,
I have
we
to
were
say,
hearing
yes.
60 to 65, and to get 70, and we haven't got that breakdown yet. We don't know how many of those potentially may have been the DUP voting with Conservative rebels tonight. But even so, the numbers are strong, and Downing Street will probably be looking at those numbers tonight and working out which of those names they can pick off and which of those Tory hardliners are prepared to vote against it. So Simon Clarke said yesterday he was prepared to vote it down. I imagine Suella Braverman and Robert Jenrick will also be two people who will be prepared to go the whole way and torpedo it. But it really does take us then into a bit of uncharted territory, both for Rishi Sunak, for the government and for the Rwanda policy as well.
In a moment, we're going to try and chart it nevertheless. But I think we should make it clear that it's not that Rishi Sunak doesn't himself want to accept any amendments. That is that he can't really accept any amendments, because if he does, then the centre-left of the Conservative Party will rebel as well. So he is caught between two big forces. Is there anything else he can do? I mean, he's speeding up the court process. He's going to, reassign more judges and more courtrooms and so forth to speed up the deportation hearings. Is there anything else he can do to reassure them, do you think?
Well, you saw his warning that's been splashed all over the front page of the papers today. I am prepared to defy foreign court orders, that so-called Section 39 pyjama court. But yes, it mostly is just warm words from the government. They've also put Minister Michael Tomlinson, the immigration minister, in charge of overseeing whether the government would trigger that Section 39 order or they would choose to ignore it. Now, he's quite a hardliner, a former ERGer. So all of these little things together, part of this movement to try and woo them over. But it very much seems that Number 10, as far as earlier today, were not prepared to accept any of these amendments at all. I wonder whether, bearing in mind showing the strength of those support from the rebels tonight, they will be thinking again if there is anything more they can do to see off this rebellion.
I still ask myself, given the opinion polls at the moment, whether Conservative MPs are really prepared to bring down the House, as it were, bring down the government and risk a general election at this point. And I kind of doubt it. But it does seem to me that tomorrow is going to be a more interesting evening than any of us expected. If things go badly wrong for Rishi Sunak, if he loses this bill, what do you think happens next?
I think he's got a few choices to make. Obviously, he could trigger a general election, but being so far behind in the polls, that's obviously a huge risk. He could then, I think, what would be more likely was him to challenge his rebels in a leadership vote of confidence of some sort. Obviously, at the moment, we're not considering tomorrow.
Do a John Major, as we call it.
And say, look, this is my flagship piece of legislation. You just voted it down. It's time for you to say whether you support me or not, back me or sack me, that sort of thing. I think that's probably more likely than going into a general election when Rishi Sunak knows how far behind he is. But I think he will be prepared to trigger that. We know that he's got to call it within the next few months.
It's going to be a wild political time ahead. Natasha, thank you very much for that.